Good evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources that we hope will help improve your life. I'm Stu Reed. Here's my co-host, Dave Bernstein. Hey, Dave.
Hello.
How you doing?
Not too bad. We got an
Uh,
interesting author this week. Why
yeah,
don't you
Mr.
introduce him?
Mr. Chris Perry just came out with a book, Prospective Agents, A Human Guide to the Autonomous Age. Just came out this past January. Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself, if you would, and your book.
Sure. So it's a pleasure to be with you guys, and thank you for having me to the show today. By way of background, I've been at the intersection of media, technology, and communications over the last 30 years. Have seen cycles come and go in terms of new technologies that, not only reshape business, but also influence culture and politics and society writ large. And I've tried to convey some of the lessons learned over those 30 years, but also given my role leading what we call futures at a communications firm called Weber Shandwick, I also try to extrapolate what's happening today into maybe some, key lessons or key paths that we all need to be thinking about as AI takes over.
Chris, you started the story with an interesting story that really rang home with me. Your father.
Yeah.
Tell us that.
Yeah, so it was a early lesson and a formative lesson, which again is part of the reason why I wrote the book and I'm employed in the way that I am. Um, so a bit on my dad, and then I could talk about the business and the lesson. So my dad was a larger than life figure, um, swashbuckling madman type guy. In the 70s and 80s and early 90s, he ran the largest graphic art studio in Detroit. In this graphic art studio, he and his what I call merry band of artists, they created essentially all the elements of advertising and advertisements by hand. So think about, again, photographs, illustrations, key lines, typed by hand. They were essentially the back end factory that made a lot of the ads that made cars famous and made those who created those ads famous. Um, it was a great business at a great time in a great era. I joined him out of school in the early 90s. Was super excited to get into the business, to be riding shotgun with my dad, learn all the things that he's learned. And something at the time strange happened. And that was the not only the advent of the Macintosh, but more importantly, software that was on the Macintosh, particularly Adobe PageMaker, Photoshop, and a few other technologies that encoded a lot of what he and his studio did into software. And the lesson is that we didn't see it coming and it destroyed his business.
Which
So
is
I
some,
so I
which is
experienced
something,
automation 30 years ago.
yeah, it's something that you have to think of now, and there are lessons that were learned there because it was really fast. I was doing software for a really thriving industry. Typesetting in New York in the age of Madison Avenue was a huge business.
Huge.
And there were a couple of dozen shops where the person in charge was bringing home $1 million a year because the ad agencies didn't particularly care how much they spent for typography because they just passed it on to the client and marked it up. So they were doing incredibly well. Well,
Yes.
not bad, but they're really, really good business. Not like the people who are doing AI today. Uh, and I knew most of them because I wrote a software program that worked for them and they handed it to each other. And then first the Macintosh hit and then the Laser Writer. And your father was very lucky. The folks I know, they were out, half of them were out of business by 89 because they didn't do the design, they just did the type.
Right.
And most that was easy enough to just come in house. And a couple of lessons I discovered. One was that the typesetters would send stuff back and forth 6, 7, 8 times often, because when you're doing $90,000 ad in Life magazine, if the type costs 2,000 or 1,000, it doesn't matter. So what I heard from the typesetters, in fact, I gave a speech to the association, and I made a few real enemies, was that, oh no, these guys will never do it themselves. We're the experts, they'll never be as good. And they were right. When the art directors at Old Narrative Agency started setting their own type in PageMaker and QuarkXF, they accepted stuff that would never have passed when they were paying for it. But because it was their stuff and it was easier, it became acceptable. A few things about the change that I saw. I remember one shop, 219, good friends, really cool. Among other things, they did all the ads for the back page of the New York Times book review every week and things like that. They were good guys, great friends, partners for a dozen years, doing well. And then when the work started going away and the business struggled, they were fighting with each other all the time. Because they were blaming, nobody wants to blame oneself for when things go wrong. So they were blaming each other and fighting over it. And I knew what was going on. The whole industry was dying, but they couldn't see it. And it really came, not quite overnight, but literally in 2 years, I knew a dozen people who went from making probably $1 million a year to being out of business.
Chris, what was your transition like? I mean, you know, Dave is talking about it was kind of overnight. What was it like that for your dad, or was it slowly? Were you observing it as it happened? What was it like?
So again, I think the key point is you have to see it to know what's happening, and we didn't see it.
Okay.
It was a slow burn, and then it flamed out. And it was hard. It was a really, really hard lesson, not only to see a business fail, but to see your idol, to a certain extent, fail in his mission as well. So it wasn't only a business; it was a family business that left an enduring lesson that it's not great to be in the wrong side of a technology curve.
Right.
And so the mission since, and there's a silver lining to the story, is that if you're on the right side of a curve, not only can you mitigate that risk, but you can't imagine the doors that open if you're willing to walk through them. So I would never envision sitting here with you guys today, discussing the topics that we're going to discuss, with the career trajectory that I've been blessed to have, if I didn't have that enduring lesson early in my career.
Hollywood is seeing that just might happen. They've got about 2 months ago, Sora came out from OpenAI, and it can make videos. They have a number of minute-long videos that look like they were shot in a camera. They are running really scared. As we know, the actors went out on strike for 118 days because they were afraid of being replaced. And they will be. It's guaranteed that there will be fewer jobs for actors in 3 or 5 years. They're already getting rid of extras. The crowds are just easy to do in the effects room. And it's soon going to be possible, it's soon going to be possible, 2 or 3 years, I could sit down on a good gaming PC and make something that looked like it was shot by a Hollywood filmmaker. Except I can't because I'm not that good. But the technology is there for anybody to start doing it. So, what should people do, Chris, who see this AI coming, know it's going to change a lot of things, and usually there are only a certain number of jobs in the new stuff because it takes over, because it needs far fewer people, and hence is cheaper. AI is so big right now that that's not true, but it may be. So, what should people do if they're not the ones? I mean, I had done typesetting and I wound up doing desktop publishing myself. I was dreaming in Quark. What should people do, Chris, other than the ones who aren't going to learn AI, which is pretty hard, most of it?
Well, so I'm going to answer your question in two ways. First, I'm going to talk a bit about the book, and then I'll bridge then to directly answer your question. So the book is about what academics like to call a paradigm shift, which is essentially moving from one way of being to another. It goes deep into what this new world is and what it's going to look like. It spans how our perspective needs to shift, how our beliefs are going to shift, and how our actions and the ways that we lead are going to shift based on a new way of being. Okay. We can get into the details of the book as we continue the discussion, but now let's talk about that in context of your question. Undoubtedly, if we look at the Hollywood studio model as it sits today, that there will be displacement for all the reasons that you explained. But you're talking about displacement around a way of working and a way of creating that's of a different era. We've entered a new one. So imagine if you have the power of Sora and dozens of other tools that'll not only be incrementally better, but 10 or even 100x more powerful in the next 3 to 5 years, which is the trajectory that we're on. What do? You create new worlds. So again, I have in the room here an Apple Vision Pro. One example of what a virtual world could look like or worlds could look like. If you think about the ability to create different types of emotional experiences that we've historically had through motion pictures into environments that we're going to have to create for these worlds, it will reward creative people and especially exceptional creative thinkers. We just have to apply that creative thinking into where the world is and where the world's going. And I can't imagine what people are going to build using Sora and other AIs that can create what you're thinking. It's a matter of perspective.
Will you be
Chris, you
talking
think
to
there's
your
room for individuals and entrepreneurs in this area, or is our thing is going to continue to be dominated by the technology giants?
So there's a couple ways of looking at that. Let's start with the entrepreneurs, and let's even go more specifically into the notion of an actor and the notion of a screenwriter.
Mm-hmm.
Again, what do celebrities have that others don't? They have a following, mass following. There's still something to be said for people who can engage lots and lots of other people in their view of the world and how they carry themselves in the world and how they perform in the world. So I don't see AIs replacing the best actors and the most attractive celebrities. Okay, so that's one.
Mm-hmm.
Screenwriting. If I had advice for a screenwriter, and again, I have, kids in my personal network who are in school right now, I would suggest to them that they could build a studio of one. They could create $100 million, half a $1 billion studio with one or a few people if they employ AIs in the future to build things that they wouldn't have been able to do without these things. It doesn't require armies of people to create magical experiences using the AIs that are essentially in pilot mode right now. We're going to have to discern which are the right tools to use. The tools will need to apply to the type of narratives that screenwriters have always developed, and they will employ them to create in ways that we've historically relied on humans to do, that the AIs can do. But the I would call this surface area of opportunity of where these will be seen, how they will be monetized, how people can still have careers in a creative field. I think it's going to be massive. And we're not talking about that.
Well, do you know Ellie Noam, who teaches at Columbia?
I do not.
Okay. You're in communications. He's done a lot of that stuff. Think back 20 years when suddenly everybody was on the internet. Not everybody, but an awful lot of people. I was really lucky. I happened to hit into DSL and broadband when it first started. And I was running around with a lot of high-powered people and doing interesting things. But that was a time where people thought that it was going to be a long tail. That instead of being a few books selling or a few magazines, anybody could produce a magazine, as I did. And if they had an appeal to a limited group, that was okay. So we thought that the people who would thrive on the internet, or a lot of people thought that, were the ones who had something new and different who wouldn't have made it before. Ellie said that wasn't the way it was going to prove out, and he was right. Ellie said no, that this kind of powerful communication, the fact that I can be calling Hong Kong and having somebody in India read me 20 minutes later, was going to be dominated not by the individual new folks, but by a few giants. And you've been in communications. How much of Hollywood, not this year, but the last 10 years, was a few big movies? Chris, how was it the blockbusters taking off, or the little films that appealed to a limited audience?
Yeah, well, I don't know if Hollywood's the right proxy, to be honest with you. There's a lot of reasons why serialized properties have dominated, in particular, that blockbusters are still what wins a lion's share of the money. What COVID did to, again, going to the movie and Hollywood production for 3 to 4 years. Think about the creator economy. How do you explain a Mr. Beast? How do you explain a 12-year-old who makes 25 million a year unboxing toys on YouTube? I think there's always going to be a market for the most skilled in using the new technologies at our disposal. There's also taste. And I think taste explains why some things tend to outperform others in both skill in using or operating in the new domain, as well as the taste and resonating with who you're trying to reach, are still a part of the deal. And therefore, there's always going to be a tall end of the tail as well as a long end of the tail. And those that can ascend up in the skill and taste are those that are going to win, whether you're on the internet, whether you're a YouTube star, or whether you're competing in a marketplace of ideas and creativity as this stuff becomes more and more decentralized.
And I want to say humbug to that, and I will after we take our break. Stu, it's time for a break, yes?
Yeah, sure. Okay, this is Community and Technology. We're talking with Chris Perry about his new book, Prospective Agents, A Human Guide to the Autonomous Age, and AI and its effect, I guess, across the board. We'll be right back after taking a brief musical break. Stay tuned. This is WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. Okay, we're back. Community Technology with Stu Reed and Dave Burstein. We're speaking with Chris Perry, author of the recently released Perspective Agents, A Human Guide to the Autonomous Age. Before the break, we were talking about kind of whether or not the giants are going to dominate going forward the creative space in AI, and Chris had some an interesting perspective on how creative individuals and entrepreneurs can stand out and succeed in this new era. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, well, we talked about this notion of being skilled in the medium and having taste that resonates with your audience or your community. And I think Dave had a counter argument. Dave, did you want to give your point of view?
But there are two problems in what you said. Because the question was, what should somebody do when all this change is happening? What's the right personal choice? And your answer was, well, some people will ride it and do it really well. There's two problems with making that your life choice, how you cope with this. The first is, it's going to almost for sure be what happened with automation in many other places. And throughout history, actually, if we go back to the mills in Lancashire, and Ned Ludd was right. It was a terrible time for the people who had been weavers and spinners. Many of them literally quickly went to the verge of starvation. And it took about 40 or 50 years before the Industrial Revolution started paying off for most people. That's when we got Karl Marx and Frederick Engels, for that matter, because it really was that bad. So that, yes, AI is taking off so big that it's a great opportunity now for some. And many people, hundreds of thousands, are doing really well. Salaries in the field doubled, literally, in the last year. But in the long run, this stuff is only going to take off, whether we talk about what you're talking about, which is being creative, or what the person who has to sign a check at a magazine takes. There are not going to be nearly as many jobs in the field. So yes, some people will do well. The other thing is, how much of success is the things you were talking about? Working hard, being creative, understanding what audiences what, and how much of it is luck? Chris?
Well, you've taken the discussion in a different direction than I thought you were. I was responding to your comment on Hollywood. I wasn't responding to your question on how are people going to deal with this notion of automation. So let's get into that. In the book, I talk quite a bit about cycles. You're right that this is in some ways all new, and in some ways nothing new. Again, throughout history, we've gone through significant paradigm changes driven by technology. And there is a period of time, a transitionary period, like the one that we're in now, that will be destabilizing, no doubt. We found our equilibrium in every cycle to date. And yes, there are some winners and losers in the transition. And my enduring lesson that we talked about with my father is, what do you want to do? Do you want to ignore it? Do you want to stand still? Or do you want to do something about it? Productive. My choice is to do something productive with it because I've directly felt the impact of being unaware and doing nothing. So in this transition, if you want to be, if you want to mitigate your risk and elevate your opportunities, one, I strongly suggest you pay attention to what's happening deeply. Two, that you expand your perspective of what this means, and not just AI is going to take my job. And three, start to pull together a plan for how you're going to make choices on how you're going to use these tools or not use these tools. You have agency to make choices to hopefully be on the right side of a pretty big shift. In the book, I talk about jobs, in particular for a chapter, and talk about the notion of employment being generative, meaning it doesn't matter if you're in a small business, big business, startup, late stage, the way that you think about your work and the way that you do your work is going to change regularly, given these tools and the pace that they're evolving. Two, you may not have a job. Again, I grew up, and I think we all grew up in an environment where careers at a single place could be a thing. I've been in my agency for almost 25 years. I don't see my kids being in a place for 25 years going forward. We will have roles. We might have fractional employment, meaning I may work for 3 companies at the same time and maybe make more money. Or I may choose to make what I'm passionate about, what I would assume to be leisure, to be my job going forward. And when I talk about it in the book, that's the basis for this creator economy, where people have passions about certain things that they do, are making money off it in ways that we could never would have imagined.
And you were talking about Mr. Beast and so on, who would never have a chance in acting and in stage business or in show business or on the lecture circuit, but he's doing really well.
Yes.
But the thing I wanted to take care of was not that you have to find a niche that's going to be good, but it's not likely to be what you're doing now, just done better. So that
I totally agree with that. I think using tools to do what you do better, more efficiently, is not playing the long game.
And it's hard to know. I mean, I'm going to be doing just fine because I have some skills and I know how to do the kind of thing that requires a certain kind of dedication, but also a certain kind of flair. And I can do that in AI, and I'm starting to do that in AI. But many, many people are not going to be that lucky. So, well, let's take it somewhere a little away from where you are. Sam Altman, who's a brilliant businessman, even if he doesn't understand the business he's in, and he's not an engineer, was talking about maybe this will be so big that people will really become less and less necessary. That there are going to be fewer jobs because we can replace, not so soon, not so many, but so much that there may not be jobs for people. And he said, we have to start thinking about a guaranteed annual income. Stu, why don't you come in with what that would be like and why that makes sense? Basic income, guaranteed.
Well, Chris, we've talked on this show previously about UBI, universal or unconditional basic income, and how that helps put a floor for folks, not just as the landscape in technology and workforce transitions, but this is something that probably should have been around for a long time, in my view. The economy is kind of structured so that there's folks that are almost permanently on the bottom, and the capitalist, in my view, system almost must have a large or significant segment of folks that are unemployed. And UBI, or unconditional basic income, is a way to give folks a floor that will kind of free them up to become creative. You're talking about the creator economy, and UBI is perhaps a way to help free folks up to give them the headspace to begin to look at some of the options. So many folks are on a treadmill just trying to survive. And UBI is a way to kind of give folks at least a breather off of that treadmill. I'm interested, Chris, in you talked about folks playing the long game, as we go through this paradigm shift. Can you talk a little bit about what you see that as? What are the parameters of, and how does one even look at playing the long game?
Yeah, so again, a couple different topics in here. One, my sense is there will have to be way more aggressive planning around labor as it relates to the paradigm shift. Not just, again, with UBI, but what does mass reskilling look like? What does alignment around reskilling to real present and future problems look like? And how do we get people in better position to do the kind of work that has to be done going forward? We're so enamored with the technology right now that we're not spending enough time talking about the effects of it in a way that gets to broader conversations, policy suggestions, and legislation suggestions that will have a major impact on how we live in the United States. So one, there needs to be way more focus on this as a topic of discussion with people who govern, again, our communities. There's another,
Chris,
yes.
You're talking about changing the political system and making it care more about people who don't have money and power, because those are the ones who are going to be hurt the worst. Does it feel like that's happening in America today?
I think this is all an effect of a paradigm shift. What are we seeing right now? We're seeing the last gasps of a way of thinking that's not working anymore, and our politicians are wringing everything they can out of this old system. My faith is that we are going to have leaders step up who are going to help us figure out some of these bigger problems going forward. And maybe the influence of these technology titans will wield more influence to make sure that their creations don't wipe us out. So remember, this isn't just a single part of the system. This is multiple elements of a system where we all need to make sure that this stuff works.
And I'm thinking,
and it's global. It's not just national.
Correct.
That's the other piece. And we're talking about a global shift, not just a shift here in the U.S.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Stu, how much time do we have?
We've got about 10 minutes, Dave.
Let me throw at Chris a lot of the questions that people are talking about in the field and wondering that I suspect he has opinions on. Let's get into those topics. First question. We know a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. When do you think that's going to happen? Is it right now? It hasn't affected many people at all. Do you think it's going to be 2 years from now that you're going to see the big change, which is what I saw and what we both saw when desktop publishing come in? Or do you think it's going to be 5 and 10 years before most of the impact is felt?
I'm not going to answer that question because we're talking too much about job loss. What I would like to focus on is the belief that there will be job creation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I'll focus in two areas on that. We tend to be talking in pairs today. One is based on some research done by the Institute for the Future. They along with Dell suggest that 80% of the jobs between now and in the end of the century haven't been invented yet. Okay, so use that as territory number one. Now base it in precedent, and I'll talk personally about it. I saw my dad's business creator. I was lost for a couple of years trying to figure out what to do. The internet and mobile computing started to form. There became web builders, webmasters, database maintainers, social media managers, content producers, creators. Like I could go on and on. In our firm, we have seen a complete uh, uh, turnover in the roles that we have in our company that didn't exist 20 years ago. And we're a thriving business. So this idea that AI equals job loss equals pain only looks at one part of the picture. And we are not looking at the part of the picture that makes us human, excites us, gets us up in the morning, and ultimately pays the bills. And so when we talk about perspective, I think we have to have conversations that reflect downsides and upsides and implications. And that's really why dialogues like this are really important, because I don't know if by talking to others who are scared and looking at media that in many ways is intended to scare us is giving us a full depiction of what's really happening out there.
Now let's
I
take
like that
something.
perspective, Chris, in terms of looking at the solutions as opposed to just kind of analyzing what the downside is.
Correct.
I think that's a very healthy perspective, and one that's kind of missing in the public dialogue, because much of the public dialogue is about, oh, it's the end of the world. AI is going to take over, and it's an existential event for mankind. And I've heard very little public conversation about some of the things that you're talking about. That is the new opportunities for growth and for transition to new ways of working. So
And yeah, and maybe just to land it, to solve problems. Okay. So let's talk about another brief example. AIs will eventually power robots that'll be pervasive. And what do robots walking around with humans tend to elicit? Sci-fi, doomerism sci-fi is what it tends to elicit. In the book, I talk about the challenge of population, an aging population, and not enough care. So if you look at markets like Japan in particular, there is a push for robotics to be in-home aides and companions for people who don't have care and don't have companionship. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Going to be a robot?
Correct? Oh, excuse me?
Is our best friend going to be a robot?
For some people, it's already happened. For some people, it's already happened. Tens of millions of people already have replicas as their friend, best friend, lover, companion, therapist. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? According to Stanford, for those that have severe mental health issues, it's been a blessing, where having an AI companion has made people less suicidal, has helped them get on a better path, it has made them feel better. Is it exclusively the AI? Likely not. But it's an element of care that some people are getting through something new that we have to look at. So I think we have to hold judgment on, is this stuff good or bad, until we see real use cases and start to see how the use cases accrue to the good or accrue to the bad.
Yeah. The Japanese, actually, I was in Tokyo 8 years ago, and Sony and Masayoshi Son were building robots that were going to do just that. Intended eyeball was going to be your dog. And it didn't hit. In fact, almost all those projects have failed now. It may be different. How soon do you think it's going to be robots that can do my laundry and can look at whether I need a pill or an injection?
Sooner than we think.
The soonest that I've heard in the field is Jim Fan of NVIDIA. It turns out that robotics seems to be about to take off. He says that just as ChatGPT showed us a different kind of world that works, it's going to happen with robots. Because what we're seeing now is terrible and all this stuff.
Yeah.
It can talk to you, but in terms of something that moves, robots, it's still stuff in the labs and not close. But he thinks that the techniques that created the AI that we know, the large language models and similar, are ready to change the face of robots and make robots more capable. He thinks they're going to start taking off in 3 years, which is a lot sooner than most people think. And he's actually building some of that stuff at NVIDIA. And I've seen some of their early things. So it may very well happen fairly soon. Now, how many people are going to fall in love with a robot?
Millions. It's already happened. There's a lot of research out there already on
Tell us
how.
about some of that, Chris. You're saying it's already happening. People have robot companions. Tell us about some of the use case examples that you see that are going on now.
So if you were to, and again, like when you say robot, robots can take on different forms. They could be humanoids, they could be apps, they could be avatars, they could be chatbots. Okay. If you check out Replica, Replica is an AI companion. The company has positioned them as your soulmate. Tens of millions of people, particularly coming out of COVID, have these avatars as their friends, as their lovers, as their therapists. You can program these things to be anything you want them to be. Imagine in a couple of years as what we call deep fake, but is essentially high-res rendering of real individuals or fake individuals. Imagine when these two things come together. I could be talking to you right now as you, or I might be talking to you as a digital twin. And you and I can carry on the same conversation that we're having today with the same mannerisms, with the same emotional connection as we get today from motion pictures, right? Motion pictures are about priming emotion. We're just priming emotion in a different way as a digital twin companion. It's frankly already happened, and there's tens of millions of people who put trust and belief in a companion that's always there, non-judgmental, can take the conversation wherever you want to, in a way that is a bit different than our human companions. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. We don't know yet. It's still so new and so different, but these are already out there in mass in ways that people aren't seeing or aren't acknowledging.
Well, that's fascinating. I mean, given the state of mental health of so many folks that are lonely, that don't have companions, that have other issues with relationships, there's got to be a niche where that works, Chris. And sounds like you're saying we're seeing it happen today. So.
Yeah, I mean, going back to, again, my father's example, if you talk about Quark and PageMaker and Photoshop and these different software applications, what like at their essence, what are they? They're essentially technologies that encode human knowledge. So in the case, again, of like the typesetters and the designers in my dad's studio, the human practice of creating these things was encoded in machines. So then if you draw that to the mental health example that we referenced, if you have PhDs and psychologists and technologists all working together on a different way of helping someone who's dealing with mental pain, does that work? In the same way that we're able to recreate a human capability in laying out a page.
That's fascinating stuff. Fascinating. We just got about a minute or so left, guys, in the program. Dave, do you have any final questions or comments for Chris before we sign off?
Let me defer to Chris because he's on a roll.
Chris, I think that's fascinating stuff you're talking about. Please, any final comments or statements you'd like to make to our audience?
Yeah. So, I think the way that we have to think about the time that we're in requires a degree of skepticism balanced with a resistance to judging. So the final thing I'll mention in the book, depending again on who you believe. So Jensen from NVIDIA, Dave, you reference NVIDIA and Jensen Huang, he conveyed in 2023 that the power behind NVIDIA and their technology capabilities would accelerate AI by 1,000,000-fold in 10 years. Elon Musk said last week that AIs are progressing. They're becoming 100x more powerful year over year. Whether you want to say 1,000,000 or 100x, it means that this stuff is defying human comprehension. So now let's ground it, okay, in this idea of expanding an infinite intelligence with a little bit of a thought exercise that I talk about in the book. So if the average human intelligence is between 85 and 115, right? But Einstein was roughly around 160. His 1.6 advantage led to human understanding, recognition of time and space, influence, modern electronics, nuclear power, GPS, navigation, on and on and on. What happens when we're surrounded by intelligences that are 165 to 200 in mass? We are at a early stage in a movement that is going to change a lot. And again, a lot of the conversation today was skewed on the risks and the downside human implications of this. We are not spending enough time on the positive. And in some ways, the positive is skewed by we can't imagine where this stuff is taking us, given the power they possess. So it's an extraordinary time to be alive. Again, like the point of writing the book was just to give people a sense of what's happening and where things might go as a way of trying to be on the right side of this and not be paralyzed or not be so dismissive that your way of life and your way of seeing is wiped out by a completely different operating system, if you will, that we're moving into.
Wow. Okay, well, with that, we're going to have to wind up. I want to thank Chris Perry for a fascinating conversation and for your book, Prospective Agents, A Human Guide to the Autonomous Age. Chris, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Love talking to you guys. Thanks.
Okay. Let's follow up somewhere down the road and see where we are 6 months from now.
Cool.
Okay, thanks.
See you then.
Okay, see you then. This has been Community and Technology. Dave Burstein and Stu Reed on WHCR FM 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem, every Wednesday, 5 p.m. Tune in. You just might learn something. Thanks. Good night.